We're going to call to order the April 4th meeting of the West Sacramento City Council, Redevelopment, Successor Agency, and Financing Authority. We're going to begin tonight, as we do each week, with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight will be led by Mr. Aaron Laurel. The council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our real property negotiator regarding our property at 825 Delta Lane. And the council, council acting as the West Sacramento Redevelopment Successor Agency met in closed session to confer with our real property negotiator and to confer with our legal counsel regarding negotiations and exposure to litigation regarding property at 3225 Industrial Boulevard. In both cases, no action was taken. That brings us to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the City Council or any of those agencies. We do ask that anyone wishing to address the council, please fill out one of the yellow cards that's available at the door and turn it into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure that everyone has the chance to be heard. And to that end, we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Also in front of the clerk is a flip chart that indicates which agenda item the council is currently considering. We also recognize that for some folks, speaking in public and on TV can promote some anxiety. And so we do ask that there not be any boos or catcalls or applause or other demonstrations, that we maintain a civil discourse in the chambers. On our agenda items, we take the yellow cards all the way up until the point which the staff presentation is completed. Once the council discussion and the public testimony have begun, we don't take any additional cards. And so if you are intending to speak on any agenda item this evening, please fill out the yellow card before the conclusion of the staff report. With that, we do have a couple of requests to speak under item 1A. The first is by Nadine Menke. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Nadine Menke, and I'm here representing the River City Boosters Club, the athletic club. And I wanted just to let you all know that we are having our second annual Fiesta fundraiser May 5th at OLG at 6 p.m. and we're selling tickets for $20. And we're hoping that any of or all of you might be able to attend just for even a little while. Last year we had our first annual fundraiser and we actually raised over $4,000 at that event. And last year we donated and purchased equipment for the River Cities Athletic Club, I think over about $16,000 to the high school, so it was a tremendous amount. So if you're interested in attending, please call me, Nadine Menke, at 916-838-7461. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bill Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell of West Sacramento for the record. Come next Monday, Sacramento Regional Transit is holding its second and final hearing, and they plan to discontinue buses 80 and 84, which provide the majority of the transportation to and from Kaiser Hospital on Morse Avenue. And the one substitute they're proposing, I think that's going to leave the present service to be reduced by more than 50%, and I don't like that, and I'm sure a lot of other folks don't either, especially those of us in West Sacramento. As you know, we don't have a hospital here, and I think that should make a difference. And I noticed our YOLO bus number 340 to Rayleigh's Landing seems to come by at such a time, maybe midway during this half hour, that we don't have a bus coming from downtown over here to our transit center. And I was wondering if we might consider expanding that 340 route so that it would come over here to the transit center and back on the back downtown and so forth. And as you probably heard, I had been complaining about that westbound intersection of 30th and J for some time, and when I shared my pictures with Chief Drummond, it was less than 48 hours later, that particular sign got corrected. But I didn't realize it until afterwards, though. Sacramento has apparently dozens of signs like that where they just apparently forgot that they have one-way streets there, and they just continue to put their arrows in the same direction, all in the same direction to the right. And so those arrows conflict with the one-way signs on these one-way streets. So I just thought I'd throw that in there, and I will talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. Those are our only requests under item 1A, so we're going to proceed to item 1B. Are there any council communications or reports this evening? Mr. Johannesson.
Yes, thank you. On March 22nd, the Housing Development Corporation met, and really the discussion was about routine business items with no material items to report.
Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you. This past Monday, we had a meeting of this City and School 2x2 Committee. In attendance for myself, Mr. Villegas, as well as board members Leland and Menke. On the agenda, we discussed a few things. First, we received an update from the West Sacramento Junior Raiders program and their members of their board of directors. They're gearing up for their season, the 2012 season. They've run into a couple of hiccups this year with some break-ins over at the Westmore Oaks, the old high school football field, which is no longer maintained by the district nor supported by the city. So with the loss of some equipment and some critical things for the field, they were coming to us, to give us an update on their organization, that they're doing much better than in past years when they had issues with embezzlement, but the board has turned around the organization, servicing a lot of kids in the area. But with the setback of the school, the question is of whether they could be supported at the new high school. And the district was open to that. I think we're talking with them about being able to have their games in the 2012 season at the new high school, which would be great for that program. So we're proud and happy to make progress on that. We also got an update on the Bright Park planning, and Mr. Johnson, who I think, I'm not seeing him here, is he here? But he made a presentation and gave us an update on the Bright Park project. In short, we'll be receiving a base plan of that by April 20th. There's lots of work being done, so a good update on that. The school district also gave an update on their solar project over at the new high school that is performing above their expectations to this point. So they're very happy about that, and more so about their they added an educational element around that facility, so that turned out to be very good for the high school students. I'll let Mr. Villegas give an update on the Up for West Sac part of that agenda.
So then the final thing we talked about, we provided the district with an update on the universal preschool program and the latest information relative to the recent court decision on the state's First Five funding. Restored some of that funding, but unfortunately the result of that, I don't know if it's a direct result or indirectly, the cuts now to education have forced the district to reduce, I think by 6 positions, the number of teachers that were committed to the preschool program. Part of it, it's not totally this fiscal year. Part of it was they held the line on some of the cuts that they had to absorb last year. They held the line on the preschool program, but this year they've had to make those reductions, so we're trying to figure out a way to sustain some of the work that's been happening for so many years, and we just want to make sure that we have a fair representation of, or fair distribution of preschool opportunities throughout the entire community, and unfortunately a lot of those teachers are serving some of the state preschool classes that are so critical for the community. Let's see, so the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District met last week. A couple items I wanted to share with the council just to make sure that everybody's aware. The board approved a contract for 3 years with Crocker & Crocker to educate the public on the advanced wastewater treatment plant project. As you know, we're embarking on this huge project that is moving slowly, but we want to make sure that we bring the public along with us in terms of understanding exactly what this contract for expanding the wastewater treatment plant looks like, and understanding exactly the steps that we're going to be taking. And then to that end, we also adopted a quarterly plan that will provide the board with regular feedback and reports on the status of this project as it moves forward. And we identified half a dozen different things from major milestones completed to the program cash flows to certain planned activities, major decisions that have been made, problems or issues that have been identified, the cost savings measures that have been instituted or implemented to find ways to make this thing move along, but also identifying ways we could institute cost-saving measures and so those sorts of things. So we're going to get a quarterly update on the status of the project, and I'll make sure to share that with the rest of the council.
All right, then we're going to skip item 1C and proceed to item 2, which is presentation of a certificate of appreciation to the City of West Sacramento by the Healthy Eating Active Living campaign. Oh, is that on our list?
Continued.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this has been requested to be continued to a date uncertain, so without objection, that'll be the order item. The consent agenda items 3 through 11. We have a request for public comment on item 5. Are there other items, any other item that member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for separate question or comment? 3 through 8. And there's a substitute page for item 3, the recognized obligation payment schedule item that's at the council members' desks. All right, then is there, then item 5 is consideration of resolution 12-16 initiating annual proceedings under the Storm Drain Maintenance Act of 1937. Mr. Lowell?
That may be hard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell, West Sacramento, again for the record. The wording saying that all properties inside the city has storm drainage services, et cetera, except for the area around Rayleigh's Landing. It sounds like we're forgetting about several streets in the residential areas like mine that don't have those storm drains, and like in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we had a pretty heavy storm, and over there on 15th Street in front of the fire station, it was pretty floody, and I had a time getting to my house, walking in the middle of the street and so forth, because our storm drains were so plugged up there at Alabama and 15th Street, which I still say need to be connected to the storm drain on Jefferson Boulevard, and that would be the easiest way to clean that problem up. But again, maybe one of these days we'll use some of that extra money for that little relatively simple problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. Staff had anything to add on item 5 based on the public comments?
Good evening, Council. The storm drain maintenance is outside the Rayleigh's Landing is done by the reclamation districts, the 3 reclamation districts, RD 900 and 537. So,
Right. And those districts don't all have full state-of-the-art undergrounded
Yes.
storm drain. So the storm drains, the storm drain service that you're describing varies in terms of its level of
the city's
sophistication, but there is some storm drainage service throughout the rest of the city. Okay. All right, thank you. If there's no further questions on the consent agenda, is there a motion?
Second.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. The consent agenda be adopted with the modifications to item 3. See no further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. The hour 7:30 having arrived, we'll move to our time-sensitive agenda, item 9, which is a community development block grant public hearing to consider the closeout of CDBG grant 08 STBG 4765.
Good evening. In 2008, the city received
Please, can I interrupt you just for a second? Because I suspect there are folks here about item 11, potentially, and we are going to be continuing item 11 without any action or discussion. It'll be on a future agenda for the council. So if you're only here for item 11.
Describe what item 11 is.
Huh?
Describe what.
Item 11 being the public hearing on the floodplain management ordinance that we heard at our last meeting. So if you're only here for item 11, I would go enjoy your evening, because that will not be on, when it says on our agenda that it's continuation, that means it's being rescheduled for a future date. All right, back to item 9. I'm sorry, Ms. Collins.
Okay. Item 9 is a CDBG public hearing to close out CDBG grant that we received in 2008. This grant provided $1,221,882 to the city, and with that funding, street and sidewalk improvements were completed on Sycamore Avenue in support of the development of the Parkside Affordable Housing Complex. Owner-occupied rehab was provided to a number of our, let's see, we had 3 loans and 22 energy efficiency grants to low-income homeowners. Those were primarily on the north side of town in the older homes. And a mobile home improvement park improved an unsafe electrical system and provided security lighting for a mobile home park along West Capitol Avenue, and brought the electrical system there up to code, providing sufficient electrical for all the mobile home residents. Do you have any questions about these activities?
All right. Nope. All right, seeing no questions, we're going to proceed to the public hearing, and I'll open the public hearing on item 9. We have no request to speak on this item, but it is a public hearing, so does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Come on up, Mr. Lowell.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell again for the record. I still wonder when I see this, and absent any indication of it, I have to wonder if any of these are including any housing accessible for the disabled, and it seems to me like we could use more restrooms and even the rehab housing, as well as probably make sure each house has at least one of what I call a man-sized toilet. So just one of those things. I don't see it I don't see the fine print, so I have to wonder to myself and aloud accordingly. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, with that, we're going to close the public hearing. Does everyone else in the room works for us? And turn it over to Ms. Collis. Any additional information based on the questions and comments raised in the public hearing?
All the affordable housing has to come up to ADA standards. So the Parkside development was, I believe, 51 units. So those are, if not, they do have accessible units there. I can't tell you off the top of my head how many, but the number that's required by ADA. And our housing rehab program does provide accessibility improvements for persons with mobility disabilities. So if we need to widen a doorway or put in a ramp, those are done for the homeowners. And I do believe, it's kind of buried in that report, but there were some disabled homeowners that we did do rehabs for.
All right, thank you. So return to the council for any further questions or discussion, or for motion. Been moved by Mr. Johannesson. Second. And seconded by Mr. Christoph. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries. Item 10 is a community development block grant public hearing to consider an amendment to the guidelines for the multifamily rehabilitation program for 2 to 4 unit properties, and resolution 12-5 authorizing the submission of a 2012 funding application to the state CDBG program.
This is another CDBG public hearing. The multifamily rehabilitation program for 2 to 4 unit projects. It's for duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. We got this grant when it was written 2 years ago in 2010. It was a little bit different banking situation, and so today it's been very difficult to be able to use this funding. And several nonprofit developers who own affordable housing are very interested in using the program to do some improvements to their properties, but they are not able to under the current guidelines. They simply can't make it work. So we're asking for some more lenient guidelines. I believe there's also one thing I apologize, I just noticed that was not mentioned here, but in the staff report, but the guidelines also allow for, the amendment also allows for grants for energy efficiency improvements. Did you have any questions on the amendments to the multifamily guidelines?
Nope.
And then with the council's permissions, we'll go on to the second item in this public hearing, which is an application for 2012 CDBG funding. This year, the city is eligible to apply for up to $2 million for a long list of potential applications, but in general, these are for affordable housing, infrastructure projects that support affordable housing, public facilities, public services such as youth services and homeless services and job training, and then economic development activities such as business loans and technical assistance to very small micro-enterprise businesses. The city is also allowed to apply for an unscored activity, which can be up to 2 planning studies or 1 unscored set-aside that's from any of those other categories above. Because the state is changing the way they do CDBG processes, the funding process this year, we're only recommending that we go after $100,000 in planning money, because basically the city will only be allowed to submit an application every 2 years or possibly even every 3 years from now on, because all outstanding grants have to be at least halfway spent down in order for us to apply for new funding. So if we apply for a large grant this year and are awarded it, we will be held out next year. At this time, we don't feel like we have any strong competitive applications, but we do have some projects that may be very competitive next year. If we apply for planning money and we spend half of that by this time next year, which is very doable because we'll probably have the grant in like November, so we'll have November to April to spend $50,000. We can get a grant this year, hopefully, and next year. It will not be a well-scoring grant this year, but if we don't get the planning funds, we'll get bonus points next year, so that will help our application next year. The planning studies that are recommended are employment access study for the Washington area, which would be $67,500, plus a $5,000 city match from our enterprise zone funds, and then $25,000 to provide an implementation strategy for the homeless 10-year plan. The 10-year plan commission is being restructured at the county level, and while we are waiting for that to get underway or get moving forward, we'd like to continue moving forward with our components of the plan here in West Sacramento. So that study would consist of working primarily with our service providers and our community groups that are now interested in helping with homelessness. We have some faith-based groups that are very interested, and devising a citywide, more comprehensive plan for addressing homeless issues. Did you have any questions on the CDBG application?
Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, Luis, just on the 67.5, I know there's a change in the language there. The staff report is a lot broader in scope in terms of what that 65 would be used, 65 or 67.5 would be used for. So the language that we're using now, would that limit it to just these activities?
Yes, and the reason for that is we have a HUD challenge grant in the Washington area. very, very rarely can you use one federal funding source as a match for another federal funding source. But for some reason, the challenge grants, specifically in the federal legislation, wrote in that you can use CDBG funds as match, which we did not know before. So when we actually wrote the grant. So we're going to be able to, if we get this grant, we'll be able to use our CDBG funds as local match for the challenge grant. However, we have been negotiating with HUD for the last several months on the budget for that grant, so exactly which activities that are specified in that grant would be paid for by the HUD grant, challenge grant, and which would be paid for out of the city CIP, which is a portion of the match, and then which would be paid for out of city other funds, has had to be moved around. So this is the activity that we determined that would be CDBG eligible and would most fit in that, but that determination was only made a few days ago.
So you still see that the activities in the staff report are still going to be pursued? It's just a question of how they're being paid for?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're not eliminating anything that was going to be done. We're just paying for it. If we get this grant, we will not have to use our own funds for it.
Just a quick follow-up on that question. So is it a transit planning study about employment centers and workforce education? What is an employment center and workforce education transit planning study? Is that one thing, or is that two things, or
it is
three?
it is a transit study for making sure that people in the Washington neighborhood have access to employment centers and employment training through transit, and also that transit from other areas will provide transit into future employment centers and training, hopefully, that will be located in the Washington area.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kristoff.
Yeah, on the homeless implementation strategy, and they want $25,000 to, or you do want $25,000 out of this grant. What is that for exactly?
That will be for staff time for the coordination of this.
And where are we headed with the issue itself?
Well, next week we have a citywide a task force with people from most, if not all, departments that's going to start meeting and talking about that exact question, how we can look at homeless issues on a more global level rather than looking at, enforcement against aggressive panhandling only by the police department and housing only by the housing division, and putting all these pieces together to solve the issue of homelessness. So in the beginning, that's the beginning of this effort. Hopefully, if we get this grant, it will give us the money for staff time to take that further. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, but I guess one of the things that, I don't want to get my nose stuck underneath the tent too far and then have some kind of policy come out as far as the homeless issues. And, before we've had a chance to vent them and to, take votes on them if necessary or whatever it may be. But I just want to make sure that we're not, spending monies on this and spending monies on that, and then having some result have that we have to, follow a certain path, and that may not be a path that I would really support.
And we'll make sure that the council is fully informed throughout the process. Okay. Perhaps some workshops would be a good idea.
Well, whatever.
This is actually just the beginning to addressing some of the questions and direction that you gave us in the council strategic planning session. Okay. So this is really the beginning of that priority. And so there will be items coming back to you. Okay. But this will give us some funding to start.
Okay.
Now, is this the same item that we had a couple weeks or 2 months ago
Couple
that was
months
a
ago.
potential source for funding a shelter and all that. It looks like the same list of priorities. Is it the same?
The meeting before, you always have to hold 2 public hearings before submitting applications. So yes, you're referring to the exact same list from that meeting, I believe it was February 15th. And the change, though, is, in this meeting, is that we've decided what
Right,
the
we've determined
recommendation.
a lot of the other things were not competitive.
Right.
This is it's pretty standard. I might just, and it may be in here, but there's usually some section that reminds us what we said at the prior meeting, in part to protect you, so we don't say, where did you get this crazy idea? And we can read that and say, oh, it was us that told you
The
that.
priorities that are listed, I believe, let's see.
And we had a
are
robust
from-
discussion
Are
about
from
these
the
issues.
commission.
Yeah.
The council opted not to vote on the priority, so we were not so there's no priorities determined.
No, understood, but just in the staff report generally will have, if it's been before us before, even for a workshop, some discussion to remind us of the general guidance or feedback that the council gave, just as a reminder for us, if nothing else, to make sure that we're at least attempting to provide consistent feedback to staff on this work. So,
Yep, okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Villegas?
That's a great catch, that'd be very
And
helpful.
we do also have a request for public comment, so if there.
So, Luis, I'm trying to track a little bit here what you're identifying can be funded with the 2012. And at one point, it looks like the improvements in to Bright Park under the new system might be able to might score well, but then later on it says Bright Park this activity would not score well under the new rating and ranking process.
Well, I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. Originally, we thought it would.
Oh.
But now that we've actually gotten a chance to read through the NOFA, the HCD had said they were going to change the way public facilities were rated and ranked. The changes that they made were not what I was expecting, at least. So parks are simply still not going to score well.
So, take it a little further. So, because we're using it, we say Bright Park, but when in fact, it's actually a lot more than that. I mean, the plan, at least as we've described it and we've been discussing with the community, involves a whole host of other services and partners. I mean, the district's going to be a partner. I mean, it's not just the Bright Park that we know currently. There's a partner directly across the street where the district holds facilities, and they want to be a partner in this sort of master planning. There's the possibility for some job training, educational services, social services. I mean, there's a whole host of other things. So it's not just a matter of redesigning some soccer fields. I mean, this is a pretty big deal, and I look at what's identified here under the public facilities and public services, and I can't help but find a lot of what we're talking about doing there. So I just want to make sure we're really exploring what options are available to us, unless I'm reading this wrong.
Well, I don't want to speak for the Parks Department, but when we spoke to them about this, they said that they did not feel like they were at this point to a point where they would be able to apply for CDBG funds. That's certainly not eliminating it in the future.
Because that's $2 million, if I'm still reading it.
It's 1.5 for a facility,
Right.
and but then you could go for like $500,000
For
of
services. Yeah, I want to explore that a little more, because I know that this project that we're talking about is a very lengthy, very expensive, multi-phased thing that we're going to do. But I certainly don't want to not take advantage of opportunities that exist. And what I'm reading, just with what you've identified here in this chart, it certainly looks like we might be better suited than what's maybe thought of in a traditional park sense. So I'd offer that. I'd love to get the Parks Department feedback on that, because I don't know if we're thinking of it in those terms. I mean, this wasn't always the case that we were thinking of it in these terms, but I think the project has evolved in the last couple of years to include partners that were not originally contemplated when we set out to sort of redesign Bright Park.
Okay. I think that's definitely something we should explore for the big application next year.
Just want to keep it on the radar. Great,
Other-
thank you.
Oh, thanks. Other questions of staff? All right, we do have one request. Thank you. We have one request for public comment, and this is a public hearing. So we'll open public hearing on item 10. And Mr. Lowell? Mr. Lowell's waived his testimony, and so we will close the public hearing on item 10 and return it to the council for anything further. So let me actually, Louise, let me ask you. So you said, I thought I heard you say at one point that that if we didn't get this $100,000, that our competitive position next year would be stronger?
Correct. We would receive what HCD calls capacity building points. Those of us that write the CDBG grants call them loser points, which basically means...
That's a call them in sports too. Yeah.
Which basically, if you, usually, and they said they definitely are doing it next year for sure, if you submit an application that's not funded, then you get bonus points the next time around to try and spread the funds around so there's not always the same winners, I guess, is kind of their thought.
So I'm assuming you've scoped the odds in both directions. That if I mean, because the $100,000 to win a $2 million project next year would obviously be preferable to getting $100,000 this year and not getting anything next year if we're right on the margin. Are you fairly confident that even if we get this, we'll be able to move either this project or one of the other high priorities far enough along that we will be highly competitive even without the loser points? Or should we consider the option of well, I guess
we have to submit the
something,
application.
but we could submit. We've got a lot of ideas for non-competitive things that we could submit. I mean, did you assess the net benefit of submitting a loser application this year on the notion that we would be more competitive for a lot more money next year?
I think my main concern with that would be, what if we submitted a poor application this year that actually gets funded, and then we're dead in the water next year for what we really want to do? That would be my main concern, and the only reason I have that concern this year is they've completely revised the way things scored, the amount of money they have available for each different category, the way they separated the categories. So it's really almost impossible to guess how things will score this year. It's going to be a whole new game. HCD doesn't know how it's going to work. And they've said that in their trainings. They said this is going to be a year that no one knows how it's going to turn out. So our planning grant application has somewhat of a chance of getting funded, but not a high one. What is going to happen is for applications that have scored activities that rate high enough to get funding and request planning money, will get the planning money first. And there's $2 million, so they're $100,000 grants, so it's 20 grants. So it depends on how many applications with scored activities that are funded that apply for planning will depend on how fast that planning money goes. Then after that, they'll do planning only grants like what we're proposing here, and those will be rated will be rated or ranked by poverty level. Ours is fairly high, but it's fairly high compared to the entire pool of possible applicants, not necessarily who actually applies. So I cannot give odds on this one. But I would be concerned submitting a poor application this year just on the off chance that it got funded.
What about a very expensive poor application? What about a $2 million application?
For something we would really want, but that we know is unlikely to get, so that if, on the off chance that we did that we did win this round. I mean, if we put in an application to build a Trader Joe's in the Metro Place at Washington Square for $2 million, it'd be great to get it, even if, but it's highly unlikely. I mean, couldn't we? I mean, we have ideas that are even on your priority list that would be good. So the prospect of accidentally winning one wouldn't be horrible.
As long as the project's far enough along that when you write the grant, you really know what you're doing. Because if you write the grant and you haven't got everything in place, later on down the road, you need to make a change, or there's a change in the scope of the work, or then the HCD is almost refuses, because what they always tell us is, it was rated and ranked this way. If you make any changes after the fact, we'll go back and re-rate and rank your application. So it's, I don't know. It is, we could do that, but it would not be my recommendation.
It is not your recommendation.
It would not be my recommendation. But
Can I
we
see
can
your
certainly do-
NCAA brackets?
Hey, this is my version of March Madness, yes.
Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you. If I may, and I appreciate the conversation on the CDBG funds and the process, because I'm still learning a lot of that. But I want to go, if I can, go back to the multifamily program. And just, in looking through the proposed changes, and I'm sorry that the lender in me is coming out, but looking at when we allow things like, it seems you got feedback from folks that are coming in and wanting, we got feedback that we need certain amendments to our guidelines to allow. Am I reading that right? 'Cause some of the changes here just raise red flags.
Normally you don't go to the people applying for loans to determine how you're going to underwrite loans. That's
Right.
generally not good practice.
No, it's not.
However, we cannot get rid of the money, so it's use it in a
Let me
more
turn off her
lenient
mic for
fashion, or give it back at this point. We have to have this money committed by the end of June. So at this point, we'll be giving it back. We can either use it to support some rehab to some affordable housing, or we give it back.
Okay, because when I see things like allowing up to 100% financing, and you put in there that there'll be offsets, compensating factors such as higher debt service coverage and additional collateral. In the actual document, I don't see what those are. So would those be articulated somewhere later so that I went back into the document where the actual changes are shown, and it doesn't really say what those compensating factors are. In short, I know we need to give the money away, but we could be giving it away, and without any, I worry about that a little bit. And it's 100% financing. There's no, what are we mitigating any risk that we're going to get paid back on that?
Well, the compensating factors are not written out there specifically, so they would be up to the loan committee.
So the loan committee will set those off?
Determine whether the compensating factors are adequate.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
well, I just don't see any.
That one item.
What's that?
I mean, if you want to suggest to strike that one.
What I suggest is that I'm fine with it if only in the sense that the change asks for compensating factors, that we articulate who comes up with those compensating factors in advance.
The housing division would be usually doing the loan underwriting, but it does go to the loan committee for approval, and they would have to approve that.
That's just my feedback. So I understand you've thought this through, and but just to have a little suspenders along with the belt would be helpful.
Well, I agree, and not just from our perspective. I mean, we don't want residents of our community to be entering into loans that they don't have the capacity to repay either. And so it's not just about getting their funds repaid. We want to be a responsible lender in this regard. So I don't know what the right procedures are to assure that's happening, but I think Mr. Ledesma raised a really important point. So.
Yep.
But they would be valid.
All right, other discussion?
Well, I guess,
Christoph.
Louise, how will you incorporate the suggestions that you've heard from the mayor and from Mr. Ledesma? Because they are absolutely correct. You don't want to get, that's the reason this country's got so fouled up from a financial perspective to start with, is because we lent money to people that couldn't pay. And, there were certain policies that were in place that were misguided policies, and quite frankly, there was a whole ton of corruption. But at the same time, you know, people that did not have the ability to pay whatsoever, and they just got stuck. And that is an important issue. So how do you, what kind of language are you going to incorporate into the ideas that we're talking about tonight so that we're really fair with everybody?
One reason we were wanting to go from 90% to 100% financing is just that the property values are so low that if they have a first mortgage on the property, it's just been really tough to do these rehab loans. But we've not found any for-profit housing owners that were interested in this program because they have to put affordability covenants on rent restrictions on their property.
Sure.
So these are all nonprofits.
Right.
And so that's not to say that they have a better chance of repaying a loan. It's just that the reason we wanted to do this was to make it work for the nonprofits.
Well, the problem that we have is, I mean, I can take you out through the community. There were a number of people that are in affordable homes that are absolutely underwater. And, you know, it's a shame what's going on out there in the world. And, you know, I think it is our responsibility to make sure that when we make these kinds of loans and things, that people can actually afford them. So whether it's affordable or not, I mean, you know, even if it's an affordable loan, it's people can actually afford to do what they're doing. There's certain criteria that has to be checked off or marked or whatever, however you want to make it work, so that we don't get into the situation that we find ourselves today.
If the council's not comfortable with the way this is written, or if you just want it more clearly defined, we could bring this back.
I think that it should be more clearly defined, and I think that's where I'm sort of leaving it back to you, because you're obviously, I mean, trying to, this is a public benefit that we're involved with, and we're trying to allow, I understand this is not a for-profit venture by us. It is intended to allow the building of needed homes. So we're providing that, and I get that. I just want to make sure that we do articulate what it is. We do have some consideration, but just stating the way it's stated here and it's stated in the program that compensating factors will be required. It doesn't say what those will be or what those should be, and when those will be in, and that kind of leaves that it won't be taken care of. So, and it will be left for somebody to think about at some other time that maybe it's not enough, maybe it's not. I don't know. But again, that's what concerns me, because when you look at it, it just isn't there. And typically, when you do that, you want to set a threshold that's pretty high, because you do want skin in the game a little bit. You want to see the project completed, and you want the loan repaid.
If that's the council's choice, when we bring it back, it would not require another public hearing. So, just to let you know.
I would add to that this is still being considered by HCD with some of their staffing changes. So we've kind of come to you tonight asking for you to delegate a little bit of authority to the city manager to possibly make some other adjustments to this if and when we finally do hear back from HCD. So what we could do is you could delegate the authority to the city manager to somewhat address this issue, but that if we feel like we can't quite get there based on what you've told us tonight, that we could strike that item, or we could also bring it back to you. So there's a couple of options.
I'm willing to delegate it. It's just
To Toby?
Well, no, but Toby will have to get sign off from the flood management.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Flood manager.
But I'm willing to to the grant, the delegate, because I understand, but I'm making the point about, you're making one policy suggestion to go up to 100%, but I'm also coming back and saying, but we want to make sure we have what you say we're going to have in here, and just, that has to be incorporated somehow in this. Because I read through it, and there is, the debt-to-income ratio for this is, I think, 1.15. It's stated there for every other project. So it should be stated for, if we're going to 100% with no skin in the game on this, there should be, that should be articulated as well. So if you can't state one and not state the other, it's just too loose.
Okay.
Yeah, and I do think, and you said it at the beginning, but I think it's important to remember that in the long term, we're better off from just the perspective of us and the community at large, we're better off making the loan, right? Even at 100%, even with no skin in the game, and with the potential that it will be repaid and enter into the revolving fund as program income that we can then relend. If we don't, because if we can't make any loans or we can't make sufficient loans, then we just have to send the money back. And it doesn't enter into our revolving fund system, and so it's resources that are lost to the community. So from strictly a lender perspective, it's in our best interest to maximize the amount of money that we are lending out. So for me, I'm less concerned about assuring, a traditional banking interest, because it's because in some sense we want to make sure that this money sticks in West Sac. But I do want to make sure, for me personally, the bigger issue is not enticing residents or community partners into loan arrangements that they can't reasonably afford to repay. And so to me, that's the policy frame, that lens that is important to look through as we do this.
I don't know if at a policy level if this is relevant, but just to let you know, HCD approved this program when we applied for the grant. And then after we got the grant, there was a change in management there, and they decided that this is no longer allowed. A multifamily rehab program. From now on, we'll have to apply on a project-by-project basis. And therefore, when we get rid of this money, this program has to go away. They've agreed to that. They will allow us to go ahead and get rid of what we've got, because they did approve the grant, but we can't do any more. So any money that comes back from a loan that we do from this program will go into other housing revolving loan funds. Here,
Yeah.
with the city.
Right.
And we do have one project that probably will use the whole amount on one project. So it will be one loan, and is my best guess.
Okay, all right, got sufficient direction. So on that item, but you still are requesting action tonight on the third item, correct? Or 12.12-5? Or do you have another, this is on the $100,000 2012 application, or are we coming back on that as well?
No. We want an action on that.
You want action on that, okay.
I'll make the motion.
All right, so the motion, just for clarity, is number 3 on, oh, I'm sorry, it's for all of them, because you were comfortable with the delegation to the city manager, so it's for the whole item.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so it's been moved by Mr. Ledesma, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item 11 is continuation of public hearing on ordinance 12-6. Without objection, that'll be the order. Item 12 is approval of City of West Sacramento Resolution 12-20 and West Sacramento Financing Authority Resolution 12-21, authorizing the issuance of 2012 water revenue bonds, the execution and delivery of related documents, and approving other related actions. Mr. Blumberg.
Oh, thank you. When I was before you on March 7th, we outlined the potential savings of refinancing both the 2002 and 2003 series water bonds. And pursuant to the direction from council, we assembled our finance team and put together the bond documents that we're asking you to authorize tonight. There are 2 resolutions in addition to the city. We're going to use the West Sacramento Financing Authority as our public financing agency who will issue the bonds for us. So, in terms of the team, just recognizing them since they're here, we've got Southwest Securities as our underwriter. Chronic Moskowitz, Tiedemann, and Gerard are both the bond counsel, and on this deal, disclosure counsel as well, and of course, Ken Deeker, the city's financial advisor. What I'd note about, this deal is a little different from the last couple that we've brought to you in that it's not a direct placement. So this will be a negotiated sale that goes to the market, and it's going to be subject to whatever pricing we get in the market at the time that we sell the bonds. So what we've asked for is your authorization to issue up to $45 million in bonds, subject to certain net present value savings, and the target we've chosen is 5%. The administrative policy for the department says our minimum is 3% on refinancings, but we wanted to have a higher standard on this one. We shoot for 5%. So with the authorization tonight, it does involve the fact that the actual savings we realize will be contingent on conditions. So the term is not going to change. We're looking at 2035 or about 22 years on the refinance bonds, and in terms of other issues that have changed, we in meeting with the team and looking at the structure of the refinancing, they said, well, there's potential to get some new money here, and so we went to Public Works and we said, well, could you use some money? And they said yes. So we looked at how to layer in new money into the refinancing, and so we're looking at about $3.1 million in new money finance that will come out for water system capital improvement projects, out of the issue. So in terms of the schedule you see in the staff report is probably the soonest we get to pricing and closing the deal. It's likely going to be, again, contingent. We're going to try to time things so that we hit the market just right. So we're going to hold off as long as we can doing our credit rating agency presentation with S&P and with Fitch, because that's not a contingent fee. We'd have to pay that no matter whether the deal closed or not. So with that, I take any questions that the council has.
Christoph.
How'd you know I had one? Paul, since these are in essence sort of water bonds, have you guys given any thought to the fact that those could be applied towards the rate increases that we're proposing?
Councilmember Christoph, that issue did come up at the last meeting, so we did discuss that with the financing team. And the thing about the difference between the rate increase that's phased in over the next 4 years, again, that rate increase sought to do two things: to stabilize our water revenues, and also to address the issue of reserves that were not at our targeted amount. So when you start looking at the issue of the rate increase and its intent, and then you look at where the savings are over 22 years, and a lot of the savings are out longer on the yield curve. So the savings aren't right up front in a way that would cause you to look at, let's say, reversing a rate increase, because the savings aren't right up front. You still need the rate increase to do stabilization of the water revenues and addressing the issue of reserves.
But I mean, if you can give Public Works $3.1 million, why couldn't you? Are you going to spread that out also?
Yeah, exactly. The $3.1 million gets amortized over that 22-year period. In fact, a lot of that new money gets put out towards the end because you have certain bonds that are refunded, and you actually get capacity in later years. So it doesn't allow us to, again, realize savings up front in a way that would effectuate a different outcome and allow us to reverse a fee increase.
Well, let's just say that this money goes towards putting in water pipes and things like that. In some respects, that will have an overall effect of reducing a water rate over a long term. So I guess we will see this incremental savings creep up through our budget processes, and we can direct where it goes?
Correct?
Okay.
One way you might look at that question is it may in fact allow you to defer future rate increases.
Right.
And
right.
so that certainly is possible.
Yeah.
But right now, we don't see the savings in the front end to reverse the current
Well, I don't
rate
think you'll
increase.
be able to defer a whole rate increase, but I mean, it could be a few pennies
Well,
per
it might
person.
defer some,
Right,
or it might
exactly.
reduce the amount.
Right.
But Toby will be gone by then, so.
Oh, well.
I'll be paying water rates.
That's right, yeah, you still be paying. A little bit, to pick up a little bit where Bill left off, so, and then in that in the case where we would have some say, that's part of the Public Works capital plan, that we would have the conversation to identify what, I mean, the priority's already there, they've already been identified, it's just a matter of figuring out where the funding comes from and in what year it's projected, okay? Great and helpful.
So can you walk through that, the 3.1 in a little bit more detail? So this is $3.1 million of incremental savings added up over the full term of the bonds?
It will, we will achieve a 5% net present value savings, and then the way that you layer debt in, you can actually fit some new money in there, and so you get your savings and you get the new money. And so the 3.1 million is just capacity that you have. You can meet all the existing debt service coverages that are required by all the bondholders. And because, you know, the amount of bonds you have outstanding at any time in the future changes. So you just have the ability to layer in some new debt there and still achieve savings.
But is this a nominal 3.1 million spread between now and 2034, or is it $3.1 million net present value, or $3.1 million of additional dollars that will become available for capital improvements in public works immediately?
If we close on May 8th, you'd have 3.1 million on May 9th.
And if we if we didn't want to do that, then if we said we don't want to spend $3.1 million on public works on May 9th, then what would be the financial implications?
We could not do a new money issuance as part of the refinance and just seek savings. There's just capacity out there to do it maybe sometime in the future.
You wouldn't get a $3 million savings by not doing it.
Right, but it's $3.1 million worth of bonds that we wouldn't be paying.
Right.
So
But
we would have some marginal savings in our bond payments for the next, till 2034, right?
Yes, out some distance, but yes. That's basically, by layering that in, you're bringing that cash forward in terms of the bonding, and your obligations stay flat to the end of the 22 years. If you don't do that, it won't save anything now, but somewhere out there, you will have lower debt service payments than you would otherwise have. But it would not be now. So you wouldn't be able to, in the alternative, lower rates now. But you might be able to lower rates 5-10 years from now if you didn't do that debt.
Okay. Mr. Ledesma?
I mean, I guess it's just, so the 3.1 million that we're issuing for the new money, or we're getting the new money. We're doing, I mean, I'm just, so we have the capacity to take it on. And so my question is where the need is. So are there specific projects?
Oh, absolutely.
And without issuing this and taking on the additional debt, what's the choice on those public works needs? Does it get deferred?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they have to be paid for eventually anyway, somehow.
Yes.
And Toby, I believe that there's a deadline on the water meter retrofit program that comes up. So actually, this could advance one project, which,
We want to extend that as far as we can. Oops. Damn, don't take that damn can of worms.
So, I mean, I think the critical part of this is this needs to be as straightforward and transparent, especially for the council as possible. And it's, so that, I mean, because this issue around, $3.1 million is not worth, putting into a rate reduction, and all of that. And I wouldn't choose to defer the rate increases that are already scheduled. But that's an explicit, that's sort of the one thing that we should be discussing, is those questions. And so what I would not like to see is 3.1 million just kind of spread among 1,700 water projects in public works in the CIP, and we never engage this topic. Because infusing 3.1 million, if we knew that we were going to be able to do that when we were discussing the rates, might have changed the discussion. Maybe not, but that's exactly the job of the council. So I do think there needs to be a point where we're having that that express policy discussion about the relationship between capital improvements and this funding and rates. Any other
I agree with that.
comments? All right, then is there a motion on the item?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to the staff's recommendation, which is items 1 through 6, and then also approve resolution 12-20.
All right.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Mr. Ledesma. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. All right, council calendar.
Just one item to remind the council of is next Wednesday, a week from tonight, the State of the City address from the mayor.
That's next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday?
That's next Wednesday, yeah.
We in March? We're in April.
No, there's a March calendar in there for some reason, but yeah.
But it would be in April.
April,
All right,
so we
questions
got
on the calendar?
State of the City. We got Doris on the 10th, 11:45.
City manager report?
And nothing this evening, Mayor.
City attorney report? Nothing to report. Staff direction from members of the council? I got one, and maybe it's just because of the day. Oh, you are the last person that should be lecturing me about staff direction. So rails, and I've heard a lot about this lately because of the opening of Riverfront Street and 5th Street, not necessarily together. We have created a new commute corridor, right?
Oh, yes.
Right, so which is was not our principal objective in the infrastructure improvements in the British District, but we've instantly created a preferable route for commuters between both Southport and the State Streets, Westmore Oaks area of West Sacramento and downtown Sacramento, and parts north of also into the Washington Square and Rayleigh's Landing areas. We have done that, and so it's now their uses there. That has increased now the pressure at the rail crossing at 15th in the same way that we've always had it at Stone. And I raise this because my normal commute is 10 minutes each way. Today, instead of 20 minutes round trip, it was an hour and 45 minutes round trip. Because there was the 15th Street was blocked for, in the evening, a half an hour, and in the morning, nearly an hour. During the 8 to 9 hour and the 5 to 6 hour. It's one of the reasons I was running late to City Council tonight. It's going to be an explosive problem. It is a major problem, and so this has come up in other venues. But I want to flag it and get some better information about more detail about how we are managing that, and what the protocols and the procedures. We had this conversation we discussed here in Northern and the unit trains and all of that, but we better be ahead of this. And I don't feel like I know enough to respond to the increasing frequency of citizen inquiries and complaints about it, because I don't know what we are doing and what procedures and protocols, and if we talk now about bringing mile-long trains and what have you, it's going to be substantially worse. So whether it's a council item or just a more elaborate written briefing for the council beyond a paragraph in the newsletter about exactly how those crossings are controlled and the decisions are made and what we can and cannot influence. Because you know, when I looked behind me on my bicycle today, and there was like 70 cars trying to get across 15th Street, I mean, at 15th Street, which we never had before, but with these 2 new streets open, it's a hugely popular
I think that
diversion.
we'll have to have a conversation with UP because I don't think they anticipated a change in traffic flow.
Yeah.
And so, but fortunately, our relationship with UP has improved dramatically, so I think that conversation will take place very quickly.
It's really not traffic flow, it's time.
No,
It's
but
the timing. And we
it's
had
more
an agreement with them that they wouldn't have trains
cross,
go through,
cross Jefferson.
across Jefferson.
Right, and so this isn't across Jefferson, this is
It's
across
just at
15.
it's
The
just,
15th.
But they didn't
15th.
anticipate the
Right.
increased demand of people wanting to go across
Right.
15th, and especially come back.
Right.
Because that's where you get trapped, that's where you get the long lines.
Right, because it's so difficult to turn left, as you know, off
Right,
Tower Bridge Gateway
yeah.
onto Jefferson, because it's not signaled, because we
Right.
can't, because of the 5,000 conflicting entries and exits at that intersection. This is a much more, it's perceived as a faster and more reliable way to get to the state streets and to Southport than trying to get off at that little off-ramp and make a left turn sometime in a half an hour if a car will let you through onto Jefferson directly. So it's definitely, I mean, it was foreseeable, but that wasn't the purpose of the project.
Right.
But it is one of the consequences, and we obviously must deal with it.
need a bridge.
And
We need a bridge
We
and a
need a
streetcar.
bridge and a
We need a
streetcar.
bridge.
But I think some of it too, because I mentioned this to you the other day, at the city school 2x2 is the signal at 15th and Jefferson, and monitoring that as well. So it may not be the bridge cross, but I noticed the same thing coming over here that day because I took that back route, which is now the front route, coming down 5th Street, and noticed a line of cars waiting for the signal because I'm not sure. I know we have the new traffic signal system being implemented.
Yes, but it's not functioning at this point.
Right, but I think that's something we will have to pay attention to in addition to UP, because I think if it's letting traffic flow down Jefferson to funnel it down, then there's a whole new traffic pattern being developed along that corridor. And it was literally from 15th Street down to the underpass, basically, that cars were backing up.
Right.
Yeah, and because of that location, more than Jefferson has a lot more switching. So I thought somebody was going to pull a gun out. I mean, the amount of screaming. Fortunately, only a few cars recognized who I was, but the amount of screaming because the train just keeps going back.
Right, it stays on the intersection.
So it's just going back and forth about 100 times, and that's what's maddening. And I get it. Right? So folks who are, if you're trying to get to work, right, then there are severe consequences of being unexpectedly late by a lot of time, or for folks trying to get home for their kids' little league or to make dinner or just to get home. It matters. That's an important quality of life issue. So I mean, there's no perfect solution, but I think we also need to be able to provide better explanations, but also understand the full range of tools and levers that are at our disposal. So,
Can do that.
right. Do you have staff direction?
No, not direction, just if I can get an update, Toby. I know that was brought up previously at a school city 2x2, and I think you guys have had discussions with the school district, the intersection of Jefferson and Marshall, the crosswalks and the sidewalk or the lack of sidewalk. We've had some close calls. I know it's been brought up a few times, and it wasn't brought up at the last 2x2, but it'd be good to get an update on the status of where we are with that. I know there's going to need to be some coordination with the school district, but right now it's still a dangerous intersection for folks crossing. Marshall and Jefferson. Or Higgins, I'm sorry. I said Marshall. Higgins, I'm sorry. Yep.
All right, we have no future agenda item requests, so is there a motion to adjourn? Second. Moved by Member Pro Tem Villegas and seconded by Mr. Christoph. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.